Hello, this is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to a very new edition of Lectionary Plus. In this section, we're going to go over our three texts for this week that we always do, but then we're going to hear from all our preachers here at Emmanuel to see which text they will select and what themes they're going to lift up for this Sunday, March the 22nd, fifth Sunday of Lent. Our three texts, first of all, are Ezekiel 37, 1-14. That's the first text, and it's such a famous one. It's the dry bones text from Ezekiel, the most famous text from Ezekiel. As we learned in Sunday school, them bones, them dry bones, that wonderful African-American spiritual. So here, the prophet has a vision, and he's walking through this valley, and he sees all these dead bones, which reflects Israel. They've lost their livelihood. They've lost their land. They're in exile. They're feeling dead and depleted. And so the prophet hears from God. He says, speak to the bones and they will rise up. And he does. And then flesh starts to come together on the bones. But then they're sitting around like zombies. And so then God says once again to Ezekiel, speak to the bones and breathe flesh into them. Breathe God's spirit, prophesy God's spirit into them. And they're filled then with the spirit and become alive, which is symbolic for this new creation of people returning back to Jerusalem. And so when you hear that text, think of going back to the Garden of Eden. This is a new Garden of Eden, where God makes Adam and Eve Adam out of the mud, out of the dirt, but then breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. That's this story told right in the midst of Israel's history. Second text is John 11. This is the raising of Lazarus. Again, Lazarus is called forth from the grave, is made alive, both body and spirit. And here we've got this wonderful message that, as Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice, even when you're dead. Even when you're dead. Lazarus, as a sheep, hears God's voice. And as always, before this text, Mary and Martha had very different reactions to Jesus. And then in Romans, Paul contrasts flesh and spirit. Different approach here, where he says Christians who follow Jesus do not follow the flesh, but follow the Spirit. And so he's encouraging us then to live into the Spirit. Three great texts, Ezekiel, John 11, and Romans, all dealing with flesh and spirit. So now let's turn to our preachers for the week and see which texts they will choose and which themes. And so we're going to talk about our sermons this week.
You know it.
We're excited that you're here at Morning Line Drive. You're going to be covering all three services, Jay.
Yep, looking forward to my very first Sunday getting to worship with everybody here at Morning Line Drive.
So we have three great texts. Which one will you be lifting up?
I have been drawn to the gospel text for Sunday from John, the death of Lazarus. And it's a really emotional text, especially even for me, because obviously it's dealing with grief and loss and death right as it's happening, almost real time, with those who mourn the death of Lazarus, and Jesus as well mourning that. I think it's a really important text for us as we continue on here in Lent, as it gives us the primer, if you will, or the push to let all of the feelings that are going to hit us as we get into Holy Week next week kind of bubble to the surface and let us process them before we step into the great 3 days.
Great text with Lazarus, but I'm going with Ezekiel.
Dry bones.
Dry bones, them dry bones. I still remember that song from Sunday school days. And maybe because I'm getting older, I'm focused more on my
creek. Yeah,
that's exactly right. But really, what I find fascinating, especially being out at the park, is the prophet is requested to speak twice, to prophesy twice. First, to raise up the bones, but then to breathe in them new life. Because even though the bones come to life, they're really not alive. They don't have soul without that
breath of life that's breathed into the ground at the second creation.
So it's basically the second creation. They're going back to Adam and Eve, and God forming Adam out of the dust of the ground and then breathing into his nostrils the breath of life. And I thought, what a great text for being out at the park is here.
Yeah.
God's creating a new life. And it's not just about numbers, it's about being filled with the Spirit.
Yeah. The what makes us part of being the body of Christ itself without that breath of life in us is important. And I think obviously that is a link between both of these texts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I want to invite everyone to join us out at Orwell Road at the park for this Sunday to hear about the dry bones and
to come on to Mooring Line Drive for all 3 services. I'll be preaching that, and I hope to see you there. So, well, I guess we'll see you in church.
We'll see you at church.